Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Paul, I'm with DiceyReview.com, and tonight we're going to be looking at the 1 to 12 player expansion for Flamme Rouge, Peloton. Now we've showed how to play the base game, and we'll leave a link in the description for that video, but we're just going to show the new expansion, the new components, and how to incorporate the new expansion into the base game with the different modes of play. As you can see, the Peloton expansion comes with a number of new components. We'll go over those now. There are 2 new player boards in pink and white, complete with the figures needed for play, and both the sprinter and roller decks. There are also 6 new stage cards that will allow you to build tracks in different configurations. There are 9 new track tiles with new features on them, as you can see. These new features include cobblestones and supply zones, which we'll go over in more detail in a moment. Also included in the expansion are 2 Peloton attack cards, 6 muscle team cards, and 30 exhaustion cards in both a sprinter and a roller deck. There are 2 new types of terrain in the Peloton expansion. There are cobblestone streets above and supply zones below. Let's look at each one of the new terrain types and see how they play. Cobblestone streets allow players to create single lanes. As with ascents in the base game, there's no slipstreaming to or from riders on the cobblestone streets. Supply zone tiles will allow players to create tracks with up to 3 lanes. Whenever a rider begins their movement inside of a supply zone, their minimum movement is always 4. Slipstreaming rules apply as normal in supply zones. The new wider and narrower lanes can create some interesting interactions whenever slipstreaming is applied. Let's look at this example for instance. Slipstreaming would be applied as normal in this situation. Since there are 3 riders but only 2 lanes in front of them, the 2 riders in the furthest right spaces would move forward. The rider behind them would then move to the furthest right space since there's no room in this square. Remember, when applying slipstreaming or when placing riders, the riders on the innermost lanes or the furthest to the right are ahead of the riders on the edges. Now that we've looked at some of the new types of track in the game, let's look at one of the variants that the game introduces, known as the breakaway variant. There's a breakaway tile included with the game. It's double-sided. With a 5 to 6 player game, you'll play with the side showing 3 lanes. With a 1 to 4 player game, you'll play with the side showing 2 lanes. So we're going to use this side for our example. In this example, we're playing with 2 players. You'll notice that there's a highlighted yellow lane in the middle of the breakaway tile. Before the first round of the breakaway variant, there's a bidding phase. All players will attempt to send a single rider, whether it be their sprinter or roller, into the breakaway space. To do so, there are 2 bidding rounds to determine who breaks away. Each player will follow these next steps simultaneously. First, each player will select one of their riders. For the pink player, we're going to say that they've selected their sprinter, so they will draw 4 cards off of this deck. After this is done, the player will select one of the 4 cards they drew to play. In this example, let's say they choose a 5. The card will be placed face down next to the player mat, next to the rider that was chosen, and then recycle the 3 cards that were not chosen. After this, turn all of the played cards face up. Then players will repeat these steps and perform a second bidding round. After drawing 4 new cards, this player selects a 4. After the 2 bidding rounds, the player who had the highest bid, in this case we'll say the pink player won with their bid of 9, gets to move the selected rider into the breakaway space. Ties are broken in favor of the backmost rider, furthest back and leftmost. So for instance, if these 2 riders had tied, the tie would be broken in the favor of this rider. The player who won the bid places the 2 cards used back in the box. This player will also take 2 exhaustion cards from the appropriate deck and recycle them with the rest of their cards. They will then shuffle all of their cards together and place them back on top of their deck. A player who loses the bid simply shuffles all their cards and places them back on top of their deck. They don't have to lose any. The Peloton expansion allows players to use dummy teams. They can either use the Peloton team or the muscle team. The Peloton team uses the attack cards, and the muscle team use the muscle cards. Let's look at the Peloton dummy team first. There can only be 1 Peloton team. Take both riders of a single color and only the roller deck of that color. Add the 2 attack cards to the roll your deck, shuffle it, and then place it aside. The Peloton team always places its riders in the starting area before the human players. Place the riders one in front of the other as far forward as possible. If you're playing with the breakaway variant, as we see here, the Peloton team will not participate in that bidding phase. In the movement phase, once the human players have made their choice and selected their movement cards, flip 1 card for the Peloton team. Move both riders the number of spaces shown on the card. You have to respect the normal movement rules. If the card flipped is an attack card, move the frontmost rider 2 spaces and the backmost rider 9 spaces. Normal slipstream rules will apply, but the Peloton team will never take exhaustion cards. If you're playing with muscle teams in a dummy variant, there can be multiple muscle teams. Take both riders of a single color, as we've taken the green riders here, take their 2 decks, add 1 muscle card to the sprinter deck, and then shuffle both decks and place them to the side. Once again, muscle teams will place their riders as far forward as possible, one in front of the other. They always place their riders before the human players. And once again, if playing with the breakaway variant, the muscle teams do not participate in the bidding phase. Once the human players have made their choices and flipped their cards, the players will flip 1 card for each of the muscle team riders. Move the riders the number of spaces shown. Slipstream rules apply, but muscle teams will never take exhaustion. If you want to play with both the muscle team and Peloton team variant, make sure and place the Peloton team first. It's also possible with the Peloton expansion to play with more than 6 players. This variant can be played with up to 12 players, as we've shown here. In this variant, you won't use player boards. The youngest player picks a single rider and places it in accordance with the starting position rules of the main game. You will then continue clockwise until every player has placed 1 rider. Each player will then take the deck of cards that relates to the riding figure that they've selected and plays the game as normal. The designers recommend using the breakaway variant when playing with more than 6 players. As you can see in this example, we're using the other side of the breakaway tile that has 3 lanes per square. During the bidding phase, you will only be able to bid with the deck of cards that relates to your selected riding figure. Alright everybody, that was our video. Thanks so much for watching. We hope that it was helpful and we hope that it was informative. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment in the video below or reach out to us at thedicey@gmail.com. If you want to hear more from the Dicey Review, you can listen to our podcast. It's on iTunes, Stitcher, or Tuned In. You can read our written reviews at our website, thediceyReview.com, and as always, you can feel free to connect with us at our BGG Guild. It's under Guilds, Podcasts, and the Dicey Review. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, we'll see you at the table.